It's the first weekend of August, and that means it's time for our exclusive tutorial. This month I'm taking a viewer request and we're painting Fireweed. Hey friends, welcome back. Let's talk supplies first. I am using this Arches cold pressed 140 pound paper. It's nice and little. It's 7 by 10. It's on a block, which means I don't have to stretch it. I'm probably going to do the whole painting with this number 3 pointed round brush. It is Kolinsky Sable Hair. And then I've got my usual Muñoz watercolor pan set. So let's start by mixing up some of the colors that we'll use for the Fireweed. Now the blossom is this wonderful magenta purple color, and the Muñoz set comes with some really great pinks and reds. So what I'm doing here is I just scrub the pan of paint with a wet brush, really pick up the paint and then bring it over to the palette. And at that point you can mix in another color of paint. I'm mixing the two pinks together, and you can mix in more water. I've mixed up a really nice deep sort of magenta purple, and then I'm also mixing that pink with a little bit of dark purple to give me a bit of a deeper, richer color. And I'll be able to pull from those two colors as I'm painting the flowers. So prepping your palette is really important before you begin. I'm also mixing up a brown, and I'm just using a neutral brown, and I like to mix in a little purple to cut the yellow. And then I have some green, but I'll probably mix more green as I paint the leaves. But for now, I've got a nice watery green. If it doesn't look natural, mix a little red or brown in to mute it slightly. So before we begin painting, let's talk about Fireweed. I just shot this last weekend. There's lots of it growing around here. It tends to grow in northern areas, and it's kind of a gnarly plant. I think if you're having trouble capturing it, it's probably because you're trying to make it look too pretty. It's a little weird and wonky, and that's what we're going to try to capture today. Starting with the stem. So do a line that is very not straight, for lack of a better word. Then we're going to get that magenta or purple color on your brush, and we're going to start doing these little buds or seeds at the top. And I just drag that brush out and add a little bit more pressure as I reach the end of my line to kind of get these teardrop shapes, and that gives me the kind of top of the Fireweed. Now, as we move down the stem, we want to start painting in larger flowers or blossoms, but they're still very perfectly imperfect. And anytime that you go to paint a plant or flower, you don't have to capture it in its entirety. I never go for super realism. What I want to do today is capture kind of the overall shape of the Fireweed and then simplify, simplify, simplify. So I am painting these little kind of 4-petal flowers, and they kind of all bleed together, and you'll see as I continue to add more. I'm also just going to do some random brush strokes to indicate that maybe there's a petal back there or there's half of a flower, because the Fireweed, it's like as soon as it blooms, it starts to go to seed. That's what it looks like to me anyways. So it's always that kind of gnarly plant. So we're just doing this big messy area, and all of these little blossoms are kind of bleeding together and blending a little bit, and that makes it really fun and easy to paint. I'm pulling from both purples and adding water to them as well, so that I get different shades of the pinky purple color. I'm still adding those weird little seeds, or I guess the remnants of what was a flower, as I move down the stem. And it's a lot of fun to paint the Fireweed. It's such an odd plant, and definitely comment below and let me know if you have Fireweed where you are. So you can see as I have finished those blossoms, I'm just adding some kind of messy leaves. I'm dragging that brush across the page in order to give me a random shape, and every leaf is a little different, and I've added some water to the green to lighten it slightly, but that's pretty much it. That's the Fireweed. I know it can be tricky to capture, but once you get it, it's a lot of fun to paint, mostly because it's such a weird flower. So the thing that makes makes it tricky, I think, is what makes it really fun in the end once you get it. Start with those wonky stems that are sort of going in every which direction and they're flopping all over the place. I've painted 2 stems here, at least the start of a second stem. And then I've done that in brown, and then I'm using my magenta or purple and just painting these weird little teardrop shapes at the top of the stem. As I move down, those little teardrops, I start to allow them to kind of go out and surround the stem so they're not as closely packed as I move down. And then as I go even further, I'll start to paint the flowers, the little flowers. For this one, I want to try something different than we did on the first one. What you see me doing here is just adding a little bit of water to the page. So I'm going to paint a little bit of wet on wet for these blossoms. And as I begin to paint the flowers, part of the flower sits on the dry page and part of the flower sits on the wet area, which just means part of that flower is going to be really blended and murky and messy and soft, and the other part will be a little bit sharper and more painterly or more developed. So in that way, you get this wonderful blend and burst of color, and your viewer knows that you're painting a flower, but you don't have to paint everything. Let that paint do some of the work for you, and it helps with the weird look of the fireweed, I think, to have a little bit of wet into wet watercolor where it all just kind of blends together. That's truly, for me, that's the magic of watercolor. And by painting 2 fireweed flowers at once here, you can see I've got the 2 stems. It allows me to kind of blend all the flowers together, and it just looks like this big burst of color the way it would if you were looking at it on a roadside. I'm going to add just a little bit more dark brown to the stems, and then now that I've got that nice blending of the 2 flowers together there, the second and third, I'll finish the top of that third fireweed by adding those little teardrop shapes and making them weird. Okay, at this point, I am taking, my painting has already started to dry, so I'm taking a little bit of a darker magenta just on the tip of my brush, and you'll see me adding a bit of detail. And this is nice to do in combination with that wet into wet. So some areas are very soft, they're barely recognizable as a flower, and now maybe we add just a hint of detail, and I think that looks really nice. I'll also add some more leaves to the second 2 flowers, just using my nice green and pulling that brush across the page, adding a little bit of pressure. I'm never quite sure what sort of leaf shape I'll get, and that's good. All those leaves are a little different and a little bit odd and off, and I think that helps with the organic and natural look. I'm sure you've noticed this painting starts right at the bottom of the page, and it's like the fireweed is growing up onto the paper. So what I did there is I just added some green lines to kind of help with the look of grass or more leaves surrounding the fireweed. And then from there, I mean, that's pretty much it. You don't need me to show you again. I am going to paint a few more flowers. I hope I won't bore you. I'm starting with a stem, and all the stems go in a slightly different direction. Then we paint those teardrop shaped little seed pods or the remnants of flowers at the top of the fireweed. Then we drop down and we start to make this cluster of little pink or purple flowers. Let some of them be a little watery, a little soft. Some can be lighter or darker in color, so you get a nice contrast, and just have fun with it. And you can always add more of the little teardrop shapes at any point throughout the flowers as well. And I'm going to do the last one here, and I'll just speed it up so you can see the entire process. Start with the stem, and then you're doing the little teardrop shapes. They get farther out and they get longer as you move down. We're going to add a whole bunch of blossoms, very soft and blurred and watery. I love when 2 or 3 of the flowers actually blend together so that it's not just, 5 flowers sitting there all stiff. They kind of blend and bleed. And then once the flowers are painted, it's just about adding a little bit of that darker pink to really make them pop. And of course, we're going to put some more leaves and little lines to indicate grass across the bottom. Same thing, adding a bit of darker green can really make those leaves jump off the page, and it just gives your painting that contrast, that oomph. One last little trick that I'll mention is that I did a little wet into wet across the bottom, just putting a bit of light green and then running the brush with a touch of darker green through it. Gives me a look of grass or leaves that are just barely there. That magic of watercolor, once again, does all the work for me. And then a little bit of darker brown on some of the stems. At this point, you're just, looking at it, step back from the painting and think about what more does it need? A little extra contrast here, or maybe that one extra petal over here. So keep it simple. These are messy, wonky fireweeds, and I am all done. Okay, so the way this painting came together, let's take a quick look. You've got these wonky stems all going in every different direction. You've got flowers, some of which are very developed and you can see exactly what they are, and others where it's just this beautiful blend of watercolor and it's just soft and messy. You've added a little bit of darker pink or purple, and then of course those leaves and burst of grass right across the bottom of the page. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you as always for your support of this channel. I hope you'll give this watercolor painting a try, and I'll see you soon with a new tutorial.